My name is Eddie Palmieri, and I am a pianist, and I have a variation of orchestras, starting with the Afro-Caribbean dance music with vocalists, and we also have a Latin jazz orchestra that we perform in both genres, and we travel all over the world. When I first started listening to the Latin music that was coming from New York, it was because of my older brother, Charlie Palmieri. He was bringing in the recordings since he was 9 years older, and he brought in orchestras like the Machito Afro-Cuban Orchestra, which started in 1939 and started to run through the 40s. Plus all the big bands at that time of Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, my brother would listen to also. And then there was orchestras in New York that started also in the mid-40s, after World War II, I would say, with Miguelito Valdez, that was the Cuban singer that sang with Xavier Cugat. And you had also the Morales brothers, Noro Morales, Humberto Morales. Noro played piano, Humberto played drums, and Essie Morales also he played flute, and he also worked with the Cugat Orchestra playing flute and doing movies in Hollywood, which was part of Miguelito Valdez when he sang Babalu. He was known as Mr. Babalu. So these are the early years of me listening to the music that was being played in New York, and that continued to the year 1949, I would say, when a young percussionist named Tito Puente then formed an orchestra that he called the Piccadilly Boys. Tito Puente played drums with an orchestra called Jose Cubello, with a Cuban pianist, and then he went on his own. So now you had the orchestra of Machito, which had the 5 saxes and trumpets and that, and then Tito Puente came out with the conjunto, which conjunto meant just 3 trumpets, the rhythm section, piano and bass and vocal. In that orchestra, when it started, because at the same time the Korean War broke out, so his pianist and his conga drummer were called into the army, and the gentleman was called Gilbert Lopez, a great pianist and arranger. And in his place, my brother Charlie came in to play with the Tito Puente Orchestra. The conga player was a gentleman called Frankie Colon. He left, and at the same time, Mongo Santa Maria had arrived from Mexico via Cuba into Mexico, into New York, and started with the Tito Puente Orchestra. So the Tito Puente Conjunto Orchestra was really an amazing band, and the vocalist was a Cuban singer called Vicentico Valdez. And those are the years that now the music really started, because the biggest dance for craze that has ever been created in Latin music, in my opinion, was the mambo. The mambo and the cha-cha-cha era. That was really the most incredible dance form that was so popular all over the world. So now you had the Machito Orchestra, which was the big band, Tito Puente, and then another conjunto, which his name was Tito Rodriguez. And Tito Rodriguez had an incredible orchestra also. So these were the big 3, so to speak, that played throughout the whole 50s, and that ballroom was called the Palladium Ballroom. And in that ballroom, the greatest dancers in the world and the greatest music was played. And that went on till into the 60s, and by 1961 is when I appeared with my own orchestra. I had played the Palladium in 1956 with Vicentico Valdez, that was the vocalist of Tito Puente, and when he made his own conjunto in 1953. So I already knew about the Palladium, but I had to play there with my own orchestra, and it was very, very difficult to get in. You had to be approved by the dancers. The dancers had a tremendous power at that time, because they were the greatest dancers that ever danced in a ballroom, and nobody ever saw anything like that. So if they approved the band, then you were in. And we then finally got into the Palladium, and eventually we closed the Palladium in 1966. So these were the most important years in my career when I first started my own orchestra. I had played with Vicentico Valdez for 2 years, from 56 to 58, and then with Tito Rodriguez for 2 years, 58 to 60. And by 61, I formed my own orchestra. And then that went into the 70s. After the first orchestra broke up in 1968, then the second orchestra started, and a Cuban trumpet player called Chocolate Amenteros came in with the trombonist Jose Rodriguez who stood. Ismael Quintana was still singing with us, and we went into the year of the 70s. The year of the 70s was very interesting because by that time, there was a company called Fania, and that company started in 1964. And little by little, they really popularized and put promotion, so much promotion behind the music that it helped tremendously. And that company was the major influence in the promotion, and also the promotion of using the word salsa to incorporate all these instruments, all these rhythmical patterns, that have their proper names. For example, from the mother rumba, you have guaguancó, yambú, and columbia, and then you have the guaracha, the mambo, cha-cha-cha, somontuno, guajira. These are all rhythmical patterns that have their proper names and that they're danceable to the form of playing them. And all of that was incorporated to make it easier for the masses to say, well, that's salsa music. And now that word really has stood till this day. When you refer to the Afro-Caribbean, which I call now the Afro-Caribbean dance music, which is really now Afro-world. It's really all over the world now. We've traveled all over the world, and the dance form is just been accepted to the highest degree. And the orchestras and their music and the instruments have intrigued everyone to play the bongo, conga, and timbales, in my opinion. All right. So that brings us down in the 70s, going into the 80s, and that by that time, unfortunately, the Fania company was in a demise, and they didn't last much longer. But I signed with them at the end of the 80s, in the beginning of the 80s, excuse me, and we did. We actually recorded for them about four albums for them, and 3 of them won Grammys, and the 4th one was nominated or something like that. I believe that 3 won Grammys and 1 was nominated. That's what it was. So it was a good time for us. So when we injected that excitement into the record company, but the music was never better at that time, from the 70s to the 80s, because the orchestras that were playing was great orchestras also in Puerto Rico, which you had, besides the Gran Combo, you had La Sonora Ponceña, excuse me, with Papoluca, and the Willie Rosario Orchestra, Bobby Valentin Orchestra. These orchestras had the top singers, like Gilberto Santa Rosa and all of them. They sang with the different orchestras in Puerto Rico. So that whole combination, the influence that came out of Cuba was really the most important, because Cuba received the first African captives when they arrived, being brought to the islands. So the rhythmical patterns that were the fundamentals coming out of Africa, then those were developed, and the crystallization of these rhythmical patterns turned into the most incredible dance music the world has ever known or heard. And it was Cuba that influenced then New York in the 50s, really before the 50s, but in the 50s when the mambo becomes so popular. But from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, Cuba is influencing the world with their music, their dance music, and at the same time, once they influenced New York by sending competitions coming out of Cuba, then New York influences Puerto Rico, and then the rest of South America, and that's how it started to spread. The music becomes very, very popular, and I would say that now we find it even more popular than ever, even though we still don't get the commercial radio play that we used to get, that doesn't exist anymore. Very select bands are heard constantly, but this music is so powerful. The dance form is so unique that it will always be accepted and will always be the most authentic type of expressing the most incredible feeling towards the most exciting rhythmical patterns that the world has ever heard. Because in my opinion, the Latin music has the most complicated and exciting rhythmical patterns. That's why you can't sit down on your chair. You got to get up. You got to get up, and we're going to get you to get up, and you got to dance if you're really into it. And that's what makes it so unique.